there, I'm not Lauren Southern, and welcome to Fascist Hunters. Today we are going to be finding out if the Australian public would like to execute known fascist Lauren Southern.
After a long hiatus, Lauren Southern is officially back. Question mark, maybe, not really. Well, she's released a book, and if I actually time the release of this YouTube video appropriately, it should go up on July 15th, 2025, the same day that her book drops. And of course, it's a 50-50 chance I will completely mess up the timing on that, but regardless, she has released a book entitled This Is Not Real Life. It ends up chronicling her journey from before she was internet famous to an overnight internet sensation, and of course, it goes through the various steps along the way, including when she had to pull away from conservative media, her return, her suspicions about Tenet Media while she was working there, and all these different various things that happened to her over the course of her lengthy career. Now, full disclosure, I actually found out about the existence of this book months prior to any kind of notification to people out there that it was going to be released, and this is because in one of the chapters, I was actually featured in the book, and because of that, Lauren reached out to me, sent me those pages in order to make sure that she did the appropriate redactions in order to maintain my privacy. And to be clear, when I got those chapters, I was initially very disappointed. First of all, it was chapter 23, and I had assumed, just based on who I am, that obviously the dedication page would be to me. Obviously, she would write that I would be her inspiration for her entire career, but in reality, that didn't really make all that much sense considering she started her YouTube channel years before I ever had this YouTube channel. And of course, maybe, just maybe, you guys might get the assumption from reading the chapter that I'm actually included in that it's more about the fact that Donald Trump was shot on the campaign trail the same day that I ended up getting married, and therefore it is a superficial connection to say the least. But I'm just gonna tell you, and maybe it's not in the book, maybe I'm making this up for comedic purposes, if you read between the lines, you will clearly see that I am probably, if not definitely, the smartest, most important figure in the entire story. Again, just kidding, guys, just having some jokes. Now, of course, there are some serious things in this particular book. There's a particular set of allegations that I cannot go this whole video without addressing, so we're gonna break this down. We're gonna talk about this, but before we do, I want to thank everybody who supports this channel via actualjusticeword.com/join.
Give me the money. Give me the money, okay?
Should we kill Lauren Southern?
She's like the blonde, like political.
Yeah, she's the Nazi that's coming here with a far-right event.
I'm not sure if we should kill her, but I don't think we should be listening to what she's saying.
So right off the top, I just want to make something 100% clear. I'm going to give this book a strong recommend. I have not made it all the way through the entirety of the book, but there's certain chapters that I find to be incredibly interesting, like when the whole Tenet Media situation was popping off in the chapter called Jason, where Lauren is essentially being interrogated and intimidated by an agent, and we get really close and intimate looks at her mindset in this particular situation, including her strapping a DJI mic to her underneath her clothing in order to record what is going on in these conversations because she's absolutely terrified of being entrapped by the feds. So we get a good look at this whole investigation. We get to see the dirty tactics of the government. We get to hear about them basically threatening her access to her own child in response to her refusal to cooperate. And honestly, she could have just played the role of the tough girl, I'm gonna fight back against everything, but in reality, she admits throughout the course of this particular chapter that she was actually intimidated enough to the point that she was seriously considering cooperating with this federal agent. So it gives you a real look at the dirty tactics of the feds. You also get a look at the dark underbelly of conservative media, and I think I've described Lauren like this in the past, but she gives like kind of the vibe that you would get from a typical noir character, where they come from a small town, in this case it's Canada land, they end up in the big city, in this case it's conservative media, and essentially they get swallowed up by the big city. Now, of course, in those noir films, oftentimes the girl at the center of this ends up getting killed, and then the mystery is to solve her murder or something of the sort. In this particular case, Lauren's spirit seems to be the thing that was killed, crushed, but of course she ended up making it through the other side in a very intimate look at her life and at her experiences circumstances in conservative media. Again, not a lot of people write like this, or not a lot of people in conservative media write like this. Not a lot of people are willing to tell you that when they were under contract to produce this many videos at this amount of time, that they felt like at some point they were just paying the bills. They weren't actually, trying to be creative or engaging with content. Essentially, they became a slave to the algorithm. And as somebody on the content creator side of this, I definitely can relate to the desire to produce more in order to be successful on these various platforms that just demand more stuff from you, and how you try to hold on to what actually brought you to the dance. You try to hold on to things that you care about, but oftentimes, as I've experienced myself, your failure to just go off of a headline and just give the people what they want ends up damaging you financially. Again, I relate to the idea that I could be significantly more wealthy if I just pandered 100% of the time, and this is something that Lauren struggled with, and it's different when you actually have a child to provide for and you have all of those different various pressures. So again, very interesting look at what people go through on this side of the content creation sphere. And also for me, as somebody who, started my channel when I was older, after I was age 26, for me, who's somebody who still hangs out with the people that I knew before I was an online person, and I don't really commingle all that much with other creators, it was interesting to read somebody who was basically the opposite and did everything, in my opinion, wrong in the opposite direction, and fully embraced the lifestyle and being around all these other e-celebrities, admittedly to her own detriment. So again, hard recommend on this particular book. There will be links in the description where you can get a copy of it. And again, it's something that I think will be interesting to a lot of people, but especially if you're interested in the content creator side of things and you like the innuendo and conspiracies related to the feds, surveillance, how political activism is treated, and how somebody who is an idealistic young person can get beaten down by the system. But that being said, of course, there is a major thing that is going to take all of the headlines of this particular book, and that is a couple of chapters that actually describe an encounter, which, by the way, Lauren is accusing Andrew Tate of sexual assault, make no mistake about it, and I want to go over those particular chapters, those particular allegations, because I know a lot of you just want to play the Supermayor clip and say that they're false allegations, as she would say, and not facts.
Off of hearsay, false allegations, and not facts.
Now, I think it's important to be upfront and give you guys a full disclosure before I get into these particular allegations, and that is the obvious. I consider Lauren to be a friend of mine. She is one of the few people from the internet world that I actually invited as a guest to my wedding, and under normal circumstances, if Lauren had told me what was in this book, the words that I read, I would not press her for more information. I would not demand documentation. I would not ask for medical records, corresponding text messages, or any of that stuff. Under normal circumstances, a friend of mine accusing somebody I don't know from a hole in the wall, that would be good enough for me, again, in the context of a friendship. And as for Andrew Tate, honestly, I genuinely find it depressing that so many people on the right, especially those who preach family values, would side with somebody and promote someone just because he has a big following who calls himself a pimp and made most of his money by getting girls into webcamming, and by his own accounts in multiple different various videos use underhanded tactics in order to do so. Again, you have a lot of people critical of the adult film industry in my audience in conservative media, and yet this guy who made all of his money through adult films and that particular industry and bringing women to a foreign country in order to make them cam girls, who again describes himself as a pimp, and for some reason this guy gets embraced, and that is something that I absolutely do not care for. Now, to be clear, in the past I have defended Andrew Tate under certain circumstances. There was a video or a whole campaign to get him booted off the internet, and they interviewed a bunch of teachers who said that their third graders were not listening to them because they were women, and therefore he needed to be banned from the internet. And I fully stand by the fact that those teachers were ridiculous if they were real. The news media using them as an example example of why somebody should be removed from the internet was absurd, and I'm not going to change my opinion on that because, again, in the context of that particular conversation, even if I don't care for somebody, I think that is a very underhanded way to remove somebody from the internet. That being said, conservative media should not be embracing this guy. Red pillars, they want to embrace him, that's totally on them, but it is not conservative to promote a pornographer who, of course, talks about luring in women and has a bunch of different various accusations against him, many of which he has basically admitted to or said something very similar was what he was doing at the time. Now, because of those biases that, again, I openly admit to, I knew that in order for me to cover this book, in order for me to actually go over these chapters, I needed absolutely everything, all the supporting information and whatnot, and essentially I had to treat it if the reverse was true and what it would take for me to believe accusations against somebody that I knew. So basically I had a little role reversal, and then I ended up having to press for all this different various information. And now let's get into the meat and potatoes of the allegations. So first of all, they are in fact 7 years old. They date back to an alleged meeting that was set up with Lauren and a bunch of other people that she was working with at the time that was supposedly to find this guy in Romania that was going to be an investor into a new media group. And apparently the guy was a big fan of Lauren in particular, so they flew out to Romania where Tate was at the time. And by the way, I've lined up the timeline to check if he actually had the place in Romania at the time that these allegations occurred, and they were going to meet him to discuss, again, a potential business investment. However, this was later revealed to be a farce, according to messages that I have seen from Tate's own war room after the fact. That being said, they end up having the meeting. It doesn't really seem to be going anywhere. It's not really all that interesting, but later on when Lauren's back at the hotel, she receives a call saying that they want to have another meeting, however, specifically with her, to discuss business terms. And Lauren, being the naive 22-year-old woman at the time, ends up going to this second meeting under the guise of she's the person who can seal the deal, and then quickly they are moved from said meeting to a bar. She also says that she was consistently told that the rest of her group would be joining them, and eventually she has some drinks, and there may be some implications in this particular story that maybe one of the drinks was drugged or she drank too much. It's honestly not 100% clear. I'm just going off the text right here, and I actually didn't ask or press for the idea that this was the case when I was talking to her. So again, I'm just throwing that out there of what's described versus what you might actually find out to be reality at a later point in time. Now again, that's just my speculation, but here's what it's based on. Despite having only one shot and still working on my vodka soda, I found myself feeling surprisingly intoxicated. Usually, only beer hit me this quickly. I paid no mind as I was fast distracted by conversation. Maybe it was the vibe of the club, or just the fact that I was coming off as a stereotypically fun, carefree blonde, but Donnie, who'd been friendly to me enough as we bantered about politics and online culture, suddenly seemed to take my relaxed demeanor as a green light, or perhaps it was one of the edgy jokes I tossed out. Either way, his tone shifted and he was far more candid now. Now, Lauren goes on to explain how they start talking about crypto schemes. This isn't really germane to what we're talking about in this video, but yeah, again, these chapters you could check for yourself. And then they end up back in the hotel. Now, Lauren, of course, being hypercritical of herself, ends up saying that she voluntarily got into bed with Andrew Tate, voluntarily kissed him. However, she didn't want to go further, and Tate used some form of strangulation or asphyxia. Again, I don't know what the technical term, choking or whatever, in order to force her into the encounter. And of course, she claims that she fought back in these particular allegations. She said no repeatedly. However, she was choked to the point of near unconsciousness more than once, but unknown number of times, and the encounter occurred. And she kind of leaves it there at the chapter in the book. You can read it for herself. There's actually a moment where she says something to the effect of what happened is obvious, or what I'm saying is obvious, and she doesn't want to get into it any further. Now again, this comes from chapter 11 of her book. It is entitled Confessions, and it reads as follows. It was kind of my fault. I can trace every moment I had the opportunity to turn things around, right up until the point where everything went wrong. The truth is, I could have said no to the strange business meeting overseas, at least until I had more information. I could have refused to go to the club until my friends were with me. I could have turned down the drinks. With whatever little sense I had left, I could have said no to what I foolishly thought was a harmless cuddle when I had no intention of going any further. But honestly, I'm not sure it would have mattered at that point. This wasn't a case of mixed signals or intoxicated blurred lines. I fought back. I was pleading. I just didn't realize there was a point of no return, a moment where my voice would no longer have any power. I'd rather not give a detailed account, so I'll keep it simple. He carried me back to my hotel room and asked me to sleep beside him. I said yes. I was incredibly intoxicated. And some part of me convinced myself that because he was Tommy's friend, he wasn't particularly dangerous. It was a poor decision, but it happened. He kissed me. I wasn't expecting it, and I wasn't looking for it, but I kissed him back briefly and then told him I wanted to sleep. I was extraordinarily tired. He wanted to go further. I said no, very clearly, multiple times, and tried to pull his hands off of me. He put his arm around my neck and began strangling me unconscious. I tried to fight back. He repeatedly strangled me every time. I regained enough consciousness to pull at his arms. I prefer not to share the rest. It's pretty obvious. And of course, because I have to go into journalism mode, this was not good enough for me. Again, 7 years ago, Andrew Tate has all these allegations against him now, so obviously people are going to have a lot of problems with this. They're obviously going to agree with her own assessment that she is to blame for certain steps that she put herself in that situation by engaging in. However, one of the things that I find incredibly interesting is that, of course, because I pressed for more information, I was able to receive medical records from within the week of the encounter, and according to these medical records, Lauren basically described the exact same sequence of events. In fact, unfortunately for me, there's actually a more detailed description of the events that went down on that night, again, within a week of her alleging that they occurred. And I didn't really need to read that, but for journalistic purposes, I ended up having to see that. And I can tell you that the allegations that she made back in 2018 that are in this report, that are documented at the time, are very similar to what was released publicly by Vice years after what she said. So the MO looks to be the same. And again, that is strong evidence in her favor. And it is a report at the time. It's documented in medical records, and I've seen them for myself. And by the way, I think that she has sent them to another media outlet that will probably publish more of them, because I'm not a journalist. I'm not going to publish her personal medical records because I don't know what I should be redacting versus what I shouldn't redact. And honestly, I feel a little bit weird releasing personal, detailed medical information of somebody that I consider a friend. Now, look, I'm no fan of Vice Media, but the fact is they have this January 4th, 2023 piece, which is nearly 5 years after Lauren would allege in those medical documents an assault by Tate using the method of strangulation. And wouldn't you know it, in these allegations, we have two women, and one of them says they were repeatedly strangled by Andrew Tate. And again, we also have other articles where these women say that they witnessed him strangling other people repeatedly. So this is very interesting that Lauren's allegation that is documented at the time is sort of like corroborated by a different person that she would have never known saying the same thing to Vice 5 years later. Now, again, you want to say coincidence, you want to say actually Lauren is clairvoyant, she's just happens to be a psychic, that's on you. But to me, I just find this parallel incredibly interesting. In addition to that, in the book, Lauren describes a war room exchange that actually has a back and forth where they end up admitting that the meeting was in fact a farce. I have seen screenshots of this war room meeting, and again, it seems pretty weird, pretty unusual that in and around this time 7 years ago, before a lot of the allegations against Tate were made public in the first place, that so many details of Lauren's account that appear in the notes of her medical report end up lining up with what's in the war room. In addition to that, there was also a text message exchange between Lauren and Tate where she describes that this was not okay, this was not acceptable behavior, and the back and forth at least acknowledges that something happened, although I'm sure Mr. Tate would say that his defense is in fact consent. Now look, I know a lot of you are going to say this is not something that should be adjudicated online in a YouTube video, and I 100% agree with that. I hope and I'm optimistic that Lauren takes whatever legal avenues that she has in order to back up and substantiate these allegations. However, there's going to be a lot of additional people that say that Lauren is doing this for the money in order to have some kind of teaser related to her book, create buzz about it. However, she's actually releasing the chapters that detail these allegations for free, and I'm going to try to link them in the description if you want to read the account for yourself. And in fact, here she says that explicitly in the additional note, parentheses, upon completion of this manuscript. I finally decided to leave this chapter in the book. At first, I wrote it just to process my own emotions, convincing myself no one would ever read it. For a while, I thought about replacing parts with dramatized, anonymized scenes in order to avoid drawing too much attention, but after a lot of reflection, I've realized I'm done with cowardice. If I'm going to do an honest book, I'll do it right, and this is a big part of my story. Why now, though, is a very valid question. You know, a lot of people think, oh, you're just deciding to tell us this story in your book, ? To make sales? What about the legal cases? Can't believe you didn't help earlier. Now, Lauren responds to these likely questions with the following. I should start by debunking some misconceptions here. First, I will be releasing all of the chapters relevant to Tate for free. It's not about money, and frankly, I'd rather not give people another excuse to project their own twisted motivations onto me. Not that I'm too worried about the opinions of anyone who thinks human trafficking and scamming men out of their life savings is some kind of noble vocation. Second, I've always believed these matters should be handled by the legal system whenever possible, rather than turned into a public spectacle. As mentioned earlier, I had no desire to put my face on public claims at first. Instead, I oscillated between denial and my own harsh judgments of women who came forward with similar accusations. Why didn't you go to the police? That would be the right thing to do. Why didn't you go to the hospital? That would be the right thing to do. And ironically, she says her extreme judgment of others pushed me to make some of the right choices early on. She embraced denial, but deep down, she knew what really happened and reluctantly reached out to the UK authorities, feeling it was the right thing to do. They told her that an investigation could only be done in Romania, the country where this actually happened. And of course, she gets in to talk about the documentation that I have reviewed myself and I talked about throughout the course of this video. And again, I'm hopeful she takes some kind of legal action and does it the quote-unquote proper way. And thankfully, it seems like this is something that she's interested in from the words in her book. If you go to page 87 in the chapters we've been highlighting, it says as follows. I wasn't looking to start a legal battle. I was looking for any interest at all in helping me make sense of what was going on in Tate's compound in a way that would keep me anonymous. Years passed before Tate's antics made it onto the radar of Western authorities due to repeated claims from other women that had nothing to do with me. Eventually, a larger U.S. investigation reached out for my assistance. I provided what information I could off record. I did everything possible while trying to maintain my anonymity, but for the most part, I buried it until I began writing this. Being a witness in any official capacity would have required revealing my identity, something I wanted, past tense, to avoid at all costs. Still, over the years, public exposure started to feel inevitable. Someone I once naively trusted shared parts of my story with journalists without my consent. That disclosure resulted in others posting distorted versions of events online or in published works for political activism purposes, clearly with no real concern about potential crimes happening. Now, that section clearly indicates that Lauren has assisted where she can, to the extent where she got up to the line where she wanted to maintain her anonymity, and I'm absolutely happy to hear that. And presumably, she would be more open to assisting based on the idea that she quite literally published these allegations in a book. She's releasing that stuff for free online for everybody to read, so she doesn't make money off of those specific allegations. And since the book is published under her name, anonymity is no longer a concern. Plus, the overall tone and tenor of this particular chapter is that she's not going to be a coward anymore. She's not going to hide this. She's not going to cover this up. She is going to bring it out into the sunlight. So yeah, I think Lauren is heading in the right direction, if you allow me to speculate just a little bit. But I do want to point out that it is very unusual that she is making these allegations about a meeting that occurred when Andrew Tate wasn't even that famous. In fact, Lauren was probably, in terms of internet fame, more famous than him, despite the fact that I believe he had been on Big Brother UK at this time and been booted off, and of course that he was a kickboxer at some point in time. She was just more famous in this world, and this is all documented at the time through the medical reports, and the meeting specifically is referenced in these war room logs. And I've seen all of this documentation, reviewed all of this documentation for myself, which again is an uncomfortable position for me to be in, to demand all these different receipts and pieces of documentation from someone I consider to be a friend after reading about a horrible encounter that probably is not something that she wanted to discuss with me in the first place. That being said, I'm sure there will be a countervailing explanation about the Matrix, about intelligence agencies being involved. What about the nation of Israel? What does it have to do with this particular case? In my opinion, those are all ridiculous. It's a bit absurd that she would end up documenting this in all these different various ways years before Tate was famous, years before it was broadly known that these accusations end up surrounding him. But again, people are going to believe what they want to believe when it comes to this case, and we will just have to examine the evidence as it trickles out, as I'm hopeful it does come out and it does come forward. And a lot of people, by the way, in conservative media have invested themselves in the whole Tate, personality or whatever you want to call it. So I understand that they're going to go full offense mode. And in fact, Lauren describes maybe an army of like paid hit pieces that will likely come out against her, that of course will do absolutely everything to paint her as a money grubbing, absolute non-respectable woman, or whatever you want to say. But again, this is actually a small section of this book. I'm highlighting it because obviously if I didn't talk about it, if I didn't press for information and I promoted all the other interesting chapters around the book, a lot of you would call me out, and deservedly so. I press for information because a lot of you will call me out, and deservedly so, and documentation for the same reason. But again, I actually find the rest of the story much more interesting. I find the pressures of being in conservative media, feeding the algorithm, meeting people who are behind the scenes, not at all what they seem, not at all what they portray publicly, and of course the repeated and constant betrayal from people that you thought were your friends. Now, with all that being said, I want to know what you guys think about this particular book, if you're actually going to get a copy of it, if you have already speed read it, or maybe you read it and you're coming back to this video, how it compares to how I'm pitching it throughout the course of this video. Again, all your thoughts down in the comments below. As per usual, if you like the video, show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on my social medias, support me via the support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about Lauren Southern's book and the possible bombshells that are dropped in it. Till next time.